Hi, so today I did a quick demonstration of this painting. One of the first things to do if you're going to do an acrylic painting is wet the canvas. It doesn't have to be soaking wet, it needs to be damp. And I can take this paper towel that had the charcoal on it because I really don't care. It'll just add to it. Now, okay, so if I wanted to do a little more of that, just take whatever piece of rag has canvas on it. Like that. The reason I dampen that canvas, it'll help keep the acrylic paint from just sticking to the canvas, which gets to be very annoying. So there's what we're going for, something like that. And I'll start off with charcoal. Need some tree branches. They don't have to be solid because there's snow in there, and we're going to come back and add some paint over this. The paint will absorb any charcoal despite the color. Doesn't have to be precise, most of nature isn't. So we're just kind of getting that similar look. Like this, we need lots of branches. It's just a guide for when I actually put paint on here. And a lot of people start with what's in the background, and to me that's this little barn here. And it's really easy if I just break that charcoal down to about the size I want, and then it's actually the house over there, and this would be the barn, and its roof. That the house roof is covered in snow, as we can see, something like that. Can't really see it because it's in the snow, so if you can't see it, it doesn't matter. And the snow's up like that, so we just have that, and we can soften this down, kind of get an idea of the look of this. And we know that doesn't matter. That's just kind of our horizon line along here, which is going to disappear in the snow. But snow's not all white everywhere. We've got some tree line back here. Like this. And some of this over here. House may come over a little farther. Now this is where I work out proportions, dimensions. And there's just going to be a lot of branches in here, and I don't need to put all those in right now. And if I come up here to the barn to try and capture that little branch, and I know this comes down here to a Y, like this, and this, and just bring this down like that. And we have some trees over here. Come clear to the top. Not that wide, but it doesn't matter. If you didn't see the original, you wouldn't know it in a finished painting. Often people, I paint from memory. I don't usually use a picture to work from, but I'll make this a little quicker. I had to use them sometimes for murals. Like that. And things you just might not imagine if you aren't looking at it. And branches. Okay, so that's about enough to get us started. Do something like that. So that's where the painting begins. Now we need some snow. I normally just have this sitting on my palette, put some water on it. Again, I'm going to dampen that. I don't care what it does to the charcoal. but it helps the paint flow. Now I'm going to take this gesso on this white canvas. Try not to be too careful. We've got that roof there. And soften that a little bit. You can take a larger brush. I'm just going to keep. Now see, that's because we have the dampened canvas, and what that's doing is it's helping add to this effect. So that's using this old brush, which is all splayed out and raggedy. It makes a perfect brush for doing what's basically stippling. I'm no Bob Ross here. Used to watch Bob Ross all the time. Because I enjoyed it, despite the fact that I was making my living as an artist when I wasn't acting. Okay, something like this. All I needed was a hint of that. And I'm going to, I keep this little rinse can here. So as I'm working, keep my brushes wet so I don't have to stop and wash them every time while I'm working. Now, told you about the Payne's Gray. I'm going to put a little of that on my glass palette here. You can see this. It's a very tiny dot. Well, I don't want to get water. It's a very tiny dot of Payne's Gray on that palette. I can do a 12 by 36 inch skyline with that much paint. Most people put way too much paint down. So I'm either going to finish with this and add more, or I'm going to finish and it was just enough, but I won't waste a lot of paint. These are some of the finer, more expensive brushes. These are Sable. Pick the right size brush to do, and this scale, that's got to be between, on this scale here to this scale. I'm going to start with this and work on some of the bigger branches while the rest of this dries some. Okay, so I've got this black one up here in the corner. You don't have to have a steady hand, I can tell you that. You can always come back and add more paint. And it's only paint, so you can also come back and paint over it. There's no right or wrong to branches. Just trying to capture the feeling of this scene. And dragging your brush on its side, that's a good way to work them. You can take it up over the top, finish the edges so it won't have to be framed. Like this. You can do no wrong. As Bob Ross used to say, they're happy little accidents. Be free. Let the scene start taking place. It'll inspire you to keep going. You might want to wait until the underpainting, that charcoal and white, is dry, or not. Now, I put my paintbrush into it on its side and I spin it around to evenly, and a lot of times I drag it across like that to sharpen the edge or the point. Especially when I want to add some fine detail. I don't believe absolute photoreality is as impressive or moving as something a little looser that gives the impression of what you want to do. So here's that bigger branch cutting across here. And I can grab a larger brush for that. Wet the brush. And that's the other thing, you always wet your brush before you put it in paint. It makes it flow better and keeps you from ruining a brush. Now, this is not black, it's Payne's gray. But the heavier it is, the blacker it looks. But it has a wonderful way of turning into an atmosphere. Now, if I take this and just really almost wash it off my brush, you'll see what I mean. Doing a snowy day, clouds a little gray. I did not mean to make a couplet there, it was an accident. Okay. Now, I could have done this before the branches or after, it doesn't really matter. Not for my purposes. Now, for that barn, I know I manipulated that image in my photos. And to get that kind of a look, you should think of everything in a painting as appearing out of thin air. It's materializing. It isn't a hard thing against a background. It's, imagine the background and you're looking at something fade in. It's got to be part of that atmosphere. So as I wipe this down and soften it, barn in charcoal there is just for placement, and these first branches have the same effect. So I soften this Payne's gray down, break those up, some of it will stick, some of it washes off. And that's kind of the point. So, getting back to this barn, I'm going to add a little red to the Payne's gray. We can make it a little purple. So if I wanted to have that tone, I need to put a little bit on my brush, put it on my palette, and rinse off this brush. So put a little on here, and then I rinse the brush off because I really don't want that much on there. I want to tint this slightly. And that should be fine. So what we've got is like the barn. It's really almost a sepia. It's like a black and white. Now, all of these things here in front and the little fence will come into play here. Never dip your brush into paint. Take a little of this out of the lid, like that. That's the gesso. Instead of using actual acrylic white, which is a glossy finish paint, use gesso. Gesso is an artist medium that's meant for priming a canvas. And the nice thing about using gesso when you paint, especially your base paintings, it has a texture to it. They make gesso with marble dust, and that gives it the texture. And it will hold paint really well. So as you're painting with gesso in this underpainting, any painting you put over it, any paint you put over it will stay. So I'm just adding a little of the Payne's gray, a little red, a little white, and getting kind of a light gray to match that. Now I'm working on a wet on wet here on this canvas, which isn't a bad thing. It's just things move around a little more. That's beginning. I don't know if I want it in the painting, but back here is their silo. I wanted to put it in there. I put it back there like that. Nothing in here is really harsh. What I do have is let's see, I could use a small brush like that for doing these fence posts, which is what you would naturally think you want to use. Why would that be time consuming? I have a liner brush. No, that's not going to work. I have an old liner brush, which has new uses now. Here's a small brush. I'll show you how this would work. First, wet the brush, put it in a little paint, get it pulled out. And I would say those fence posts go from, doesn't really matter, it's my painting, they'll be wherever I put them. Yeah. And they end up over here. Like that. Despite the fact that we know there is like wire between them, We don't paint it in because we can't see it. If I can't see it, it doesn't go in my painting. We've got this here, which kind of gives an indication of distance. And these really fade out up in here. We're going to be doing more painting, so some of these may have to get painted back in. We can do a roof line on the barn. Give a little shadow under there. We can define this house a little bit more. It's actually just slightly higher in position than the barn. It's a little harsh, but I don't care. I can take that and bring it down with a little gray. Probably add to it. Getting a little more defined. At this distance, to keep it looking like it's in the distance, we want to stay away from too much detail. There's a little window up in the top of that barn that I can see. And just a little bit of that will add a nice little touch. And a little spot over here. And there's some white there. Paint what you see. Now, I started to say, a lot of people ask me, since I usually paint from memory, not using pictures, how I remember all the details. And my point would be, if I don't remember it, it shouldn't be in my painting. So, put some snow on that roof. Since I can barely see it, I think the snow here should be barely seen. And we'll let it come down over that peak a little bit. This in here. Just soften that in. I know from this angle there's a little bit of that. Do that. So far we're working with some red, white, Payne's gray. Those three colors. And the white is gesso. Dampen the canvas first, sketch it out in charcoal, and then come back and start laying in a painting. Rinsing your brush off in between, kind of wipe it down so it holds its shape. A little more detail in here now. I'm going to add a little distance in here. Add depth. Get a little heavier with this paint here. It's snow, it's bark, it doesn't have an absolute recognizable shape until you give it one. Do that. Now see, none of this is that dark except maybe this area down in here. It's really shadowed and it's much closer. Now I'm rolling this brush as I paint. It does a couple of things. It gives me very natural angles and it keeps actual paint down here on this brush, on the canvas. Now as this canvas begins to dry a little, the paint won't run as much. Now all I really need to do is, nature just doesn't care about patterns that much. There's no wrong here. It's just going to be branches. Look at some of the branches and see what you like and do what feels right. And, I like this little piece down in here. And just going to do that. And roll this a little heavier. Give myself a little depth in this. I'm going to add a little more Payne's Gray, because this paint is actually, the way I'm doing it, taking more paint than some of my skylines do. So now I'm using this Payne's Gray pretty much straight on to get the deeper shadow areas. This has a branch that comes down. I like this branch. Now I'm going to leave this little light spot up here. And I want to put something really dark in here. Now this one would be served well by doing that. Now see, as that dries back there, that's beginning to dry down. We're getting the feeling of the farm, and this is beginning to come to life. It's really just a matter at this point of, you see, you can do things like roll this brush back and forth a little bit. Wet the brush down, spin it around in the paint. I don't like that, it's too heavy. It doesn't hurt anything. I got white paint, I can make it disappear. Go back here, I want to add that dark in, and I want to add this one in here. Now the fine parts of it are just too fine for this brush, so I'll like that. Now I'm going to change, see, I'm rinsing this out, pull it off. Then I'm going to go to a little finer brush, but the nice thing about this brush is it holds enough paint. I'm going to start back here at this end, connect with that, and I'm going to give it its brush there, a little branch here, branch there, and this could use some dark paint in here. Like that. Now remember, any of the light I leave in here is going to end up being snow. You can do no wrong, really. Anything, you can always just come back. Okay, we need to connect this in here to that. Branches can go down anywhere. Doesn't really matter. But they follow the kind of shapes that you'll see in marble and stone and concrete. It's that wide branchings to Ys, and always branch off like that. And then you can just spend hours and hours, if you'd like, painting in all these little branches. And it's right, some things there's just no quick and easy way of doing it that makes any sense. You just have a tangle here of brushes that we don't, or branches that we don't know where they came from or where they're going, and it doesn't really matter. Do have some stuff in here that I don't really care about, but some bushes with snow on them, and I can come back and put the snow in, or take my wet brush or my wet rag here and it's just that. Again, I can come back. This doesn't need to be too clean in there. Adds a little weight to that corner. You want to think in terms of balance when you're doing a painting, which means it looks like if it were just hanging in midair, it would stay straight. To me, that's what balance in a painting is about. So just continue to doing it at this angle because really I hadn't planned on doing this today. Thought I'd try this. Spinning that brush to get a nice little tip on it, and just continuing. Roll the brush, branches. See some of these branches up there in here are real soft, but put them in. We're going to be coming back and making it snow. I like this one kind of running down through the middle of the barn. So we'll bring this tree down here. Branches it here. This is a tree that's actually closer. It comes down into here and gets lost in the snow bank, along with these trees over here, which we can come back and put a little more into those. Kind of come up to the top up here. I like to keep things fairly simple. If I just wet my brush, keep a little bit of color on it. There's a bit of a, try and look at the painting and see what you're looking at there. If I didn't have my titles all over, it'd be easier. These fences in here. Just across here, a little bit to that. And then this is just finer is better, so get a nice rolled tip on this brush. Some artists use a daub stick. If you don't know what it is, it's a stick with the ball on the end of it so you can rest your hand on it and control without touching the painting. Don't often use them myself. Used to years ago when I was doing sign painting. So there's how it begins and how much you want to go into it, and I can add a little more dark, like bring this one tree here. Paint knives are wonderful. I use them all the time in my work. So I'm going to take some gesso, put it on the edge of this palette plate, and dampen my brush so it'll splatter without getting it on my iPad, I hope. Just dip it in here like this. That was a little more than I wanted. A lot of ways of doing it. Smack it, split it. Probably gonna have to watch that iPad when I get done. If I waited till this was dry, it would be better for coming back and laying snow in on these branches, because it's right now it's going to pick up the gesso. So you just get a bunch of paint on the edge of it like this. Use a smaller brush to get the smaller branches. Again, I come over here and branches are covered with snow, and top of the barn. Come back and redefine that anytime I want. This brush, same thing, just roll it in paint, never down to the ferrule, never ruin your brushes. Now, because we did the Payne's gray in the background, that sort of atmosphere, the white will really stand out nicely. Snow likes to hang over edges, so even in the distance like that, it begins to look more like snow if I roll that down a little. And that will define that barn a little more. Snow doesn't always fall evenly, it clumps, you don't need to worry about that. Now, I like the way it lays on top of these branches, so I'm going to just use the edge of this brush and create the path of that branch. And my little splatter there just becomes kind of, as Bob Ross would say, a happy accident. God, I loved watching Bob Ross. I come home from painting murals all day long, and on a Saturday morning watch Bob Ross and relax. I can't say that I really learned much from Bob Ross. His technique's very different in his really heavy use of paint. I can do it. It's just not my way of working, but I just love to look at his paintings. Now, I didn't like that because I see something here that really adds to the look. See how this doesn't have snow in there? So, gee, I don't like that. What am I going to do? It's paint. I'm going to take it off. I'm going to come back and pad that down. Now, that gives it more of a natural kind of look to it. Up here, I like that. Now, by just touching it with the edge of this, I can now take this get such nice random you take this and totally pad into that. And add to the atmosphere of the snow. Now I want to come back with a little of my red, Payne's gray, and come back into this barn. That. Roll that brush in so I get a nice tip. Put a nice little window in there. It's a Bob Ross happy window in the barn. I think it's just open. You can see the light through it. I'm not really sure. I don't really care. I just see it in the picture. And it seems to add nicely to that effect. Like that. And really the barn became a little dominant there, but you get the idea. You can bring the house in a little bit more. And that's just a quick idea of one way of capturing this scene. Now, you can do washes. I can put a little more Payne's gray on my brush, and using this stick, since I'm doing this wet on wet, we got a little bit of equipment and things laying in there, and I'm not sure what they are. It doesn't really matter. A little of that. Could put the silo back here. Good. Now I would let this dry a bit normally. Come back in and do some of this stuff so it doesn't just disappear. It's nice to add interesting, indescribable things in a painting like this for a very good reason. There was a little more of an opening over there, which I don't have. But, you know, you want a painting to ask questions. What is it? You want to draw interest into it. And because there's a back barn back there. The house must be up here. Honestly, I haven't paid that much attention. I'm just grab this out and say, well, maybe I'll do this. I've had some requests since I posted this picture. Now, just because it's there doesn't mean it needs to be in the painting. But if you want to put them in, you put it in. If not, hey, it's your painting. Do what you want. That's a little harsh for this painting. If it's too much trouble, we always have our white. And it'll do nothing but add happy little accident. We don't know what it is, but there's something of interest back there. And I'm going to attempt, it's a little much. This tree line back here is kind of nice, but I think it's going to get lost in all of this stuff because it's really just the atmosphere. So it shows a nice distance. And I think that it would help to, on this painting, so you can see on the palette, I can see what kind of a line this is going to make. And now is a good time to come in and just spend as much time as you want adding in endless branches in this painting. I did a painting called Branches. That's in oil. That was painted in 2006. It's on my website, jackdiamondart.com. It was a very, very detailed oil painting of some branches, half submerged. It was in the springtime and there was ice melting and it created such a neat effect when I saw it. It's one where it didn't work from my photograph, but the memory of it stuck with me and I did this detailed painting called Branches. It's a birch tree branches that were laying partially submerged. Some of it was reflecting and the sun was coming up on a cold morning. Created such a neat effect. I said earlier I wanted to put the dark back in this. I let that white dry some. The nice thing about dragging this through that white is it gives it a really neat look. See, branches over branches. Good. Now all the branches I did earlier, which are kind of disappeared, they had a nice depth. So the darker branches appear closer. Never afraid to use your fingers or your hands. So you want to leave some of the light ones and come off from them. Oh, and I think their house is over here. This is a barn that's further back, and this is the barn. This is the farm across the street from my home here. And maybe we have a happy little bird sitting on that post there. I sometimes like to put little birds in my paintings, so. Because they're everywhere. That's not so good. And the nice thing about this painting is it just has to become a branch. This brush was too big on this on this tiny canvas. This brush is just too big for what I was trying to do. Like I said, I'm used to working on, I would normally do this on nothing short of a 24 by 48. That. There's one tree back there. Now if we can capture it this way, there's a lot going on here, but it's kind of a neat. Into there. It'd be like this one here. I've compressed it in a little over to there. What it has to do is soften down into the atmosphere. Another one in there, that's okay. Like that. I'm going to rinse this brush out. Come back with a little white. Dirty. Now perhaps this liner brush. Again, that's a sable liner brush. Liner brushes are for just what they sound like. A lot of you in sign painting we use a liner brush because it'll hold the line when you're doing letters and such. So you can see. Give a little shadow into that window there. Just a little shadow onto the edge of that barn roof. Some of the equipment in front here. Now the thing to remember, one thing to remember, colors change as paintings dry. They become more subtle and soft. So now I'm bringing these branches to the foreground, the darkest, to add that wonderful depth. Now because I was doing wet on wet, the darker Payne's gray, as it dries and the paints blend, gives me gradients, and I can come back time and again and add in my darker lines, and everything becomes a little more dimensional. So you get a much more three-dimensional look out of it. And there's kind of a neat major branch coming down through there. I put a bunch of paint on this liner brush and pick it up there. I don't care about the other branches that I'm going over because it happens in nature. A little more paint. By keeping this wet, I have the water collected down here and it's dirty from all of this. Well, it's not dirty, it's colored with paint. So I can make use of that. I sometimes used to watch Bob Ross and think, "Stop there, Bob, I liked it the way it was." And he would always add the little cabin in. I'd go, "Oh, that was such a pretty scene, it didn't need it." You didn't need the cabin, but you know, he never listens to me talking to him through the television. Nevertheless, great man, had a good life, kind man, and I enjoyed him. Less is more most of the time. I'm a large proponent of not overdoing it. I'm fundamentally a minimalist. But there are paintings like this, which I mostly avoid doing. But people ask me for them. I do commissioned artwork, and not a lot of people consider that as commission. By commission, for me, I mean, if you see something on my website, chances are it's already sold, but if you really like it, I will add another one to the series. So it'll be similar to the one you like in the size, and sometimes I'll make color adjustments depending on the painting. I'm going to attempt to sign this. This is pretty small for me for a signature, but as Bob always did, my signature is red, and there's going to be a tough one down in this corner. Like that. And I have no compunction about, I sometimes sign a canvas before I start the painting because I know no matter what, the painting's going to get finished. Usually because it meant I have to get my money back out of the canvas to survive. Now I want all these branches to kind of have snow on them or disappear in the snow. And the thing is, I couldn't hide those dark areas if I wanted to. They will come back through. Well, I could if I let it dry. If I let this dry and paint it over, all of that would ghost back through. So there's no fear in going over something. Now I'm going to rub this because I think it's just a little too dark. Takes away from the atmosphere. Except this right up front here. And just like that. And like I said, it's only paint. And as Bob always said, it's just a happy accident. It'll probably improve the look of it. They don't much look like branches if you don't put some of these like that. That's going to end up looking like a shadow in there from this tree, but that's up to the viewer to decide. So, yeah. And light ones and dark ones and all the different colors in here just add to dimension. Now, I didn't say dementia, that's a whole nother issue, being an artist. All right, what did you think? If you like this painting, hit subscribe. And if you want, go to my website, jackdiamondart.com, and look at more of my art. If you're not sure how to make your own large canvases and save money, check out my video on how to properly stretch a canvas. So learning to stretch a canvas can be very beneficial if you're on a budget. And most of us are. All right, thanks. I'll see you in the next video.